Hey, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's able to hear okay. We'll go ahead and do Ruth chapter 2 tonight. Just a little bit of a review from what Pastor shared with us last night. Basically, in chapter 1 of Ruth, we get Elimelech is going to take his wife Naomi, their two sons, to Moab. Moab being evil, and he talked about Lot and the incest with his daughter, is how that really got all started. In essence, in 10 years, Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion, the two sons, are going to die as well as the dad, leaving Naomi with Orpah and Ruth, her daughter-in-laws. Of course, Elimelech is going to leave to go to Moab um, and search for food and supposedly a better way of life. But famine has struck. Naomi hears that they're handing out bread in Bethlehem. And so she is going to go back with her two daughter-in-laws in hopes of getting some bread. In chapter 1 and verse 14, we see there that Orpah is going to leave. And then we get probably the center point, one of the center points of chapter 1 in verse 16, when Naomi gives her plea or her vows her dedication. It says, and Ruth said to Naomi, entreat me not to leave thee and return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go. Where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people will be my people. Thy God will be my God. And so we see here that Ruth is going to stay, which kind of brings us into chapter 2. Thing I found last night in studying that I liked, kind of a little bit of an outline, that in essence, the whole book of Ruth here, we're going to see two places. One, the land of promise, which being Bethlehem, the land of compromise, which is what Elimelech chose for his family, compromise, an easier way out, that being Moab. We see two women. We got Naomi, who is, truly dealing with some honest hurt here. She has lived a 10-year nightmare of losing her husband, as well as both of her sons. The other woman that we're going to see here is Ruth and her humble devotion. And then the two needs, food and family. We see how that kind of, in chapter 1, it gets started, them heading in one direction. And of course, now the guys are going to be gone. And so now we have just Ruth and Naomi, and they're going back the other direction, but still searching for the same thing, food and family. Pastor mentioned yesterday about, bad choices, bad decisions, and kind of the theological part of Ruth. So in essence, we see God's sovereign design as tragedy will turn to triumph. And so that kind of gets us into chapter 2 here, if I can get that to click. All right, so chapter 2 here, we're going to be introduced to Boaz. He's kind of going to be the hero of this story. Boaz is going to be the mighty man. And of course, don't want to jump the gun here and cover what's going to take place in chapters 3 and 4, but we'll see here that he is going to be known as which is a little bit of the theology here, the kinsman redeemer. And we'll touch on that a little bit here at the end. So Boaz, which his name actually means strength, is going to come on the scene here as Naomi and Ruth go back to Bethlehem. At the end of chapter 1, they're kind of in the harvesting season here, or the barley harvest. And so that's kind of with the first half of chapter 2 is Ruth going out to glean. And to glean is kind of an Old Testament, it's a Mosaic thing. and it was God put it in the law in order to take care of the poor. He tells us in Leviticus in chapter 19, and read for you verses 9 and 10. It says, "And when you reap your harvest, the harvest of your hand, you shall not wholly reap the corners of the field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of the harvest. And thou shalt not glean the vineyards, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God." And so we see here in Leviticus, God setting up kind of his plans of taking care of the poor, that the owners of the vineyard would not, clean the outer portions of it. They would leave part of it for the poor to come in and glean, if you will, to pick and to be able to eat. So remember, Naomi and Ruth have returned back to Bethlehem, needy, to say the least. They have, both lost a husband. They've lost a friend that they had in Orpah. So they're, all they have really right now is the two of themselves. And so they are going back to Bethlehem. And of course, Ruth is going as a stranger. She is a foreigner because of Moab, and kind of the disgruntled relationship that they have with the Israelites. Okay. So in verse 2, she tells that she's going out to glean, and she's got to have favor from a landowner. Okay. And I like verse 3 and the way it is worded in God's word. It says, "And she went and she came and she gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on part of the field belonging to Boaz." And that's to say, and it just so happened. Okay. And or if, luck would have it, as we may say today. Of course, we know that in God's economy, there is no luck. There's no by chance. Okay. God has an infinite plan for everything. And so she's going to end up in the fields of Boaz. And in chapter 4, we get another one of those moments that Boaz is going to show up, and Boaz being a wealthy man, man of power, and wealth, visiting his fields. That was where the servants were. That was the people that he was working, were at, and usually the landowner's not going to show up. But today here, Boaz, late in the evening, when most of the gleaning was done, he is going to show up. And then verse 5, we kind of get, and remember, we've got a love scene here going. It's kind of a, I guess your modern day chick flick, if you will, that, most ladies and some men would enjoy, just this great romantic thing that's taken place. And so in chapter 5, or in verse 5, Boaz kind of gets the, Old Testament, terminology of, whoa, check out her. Look at that babe over there. And he asked the question, he says, whose is that? Who is this woman? And I think he's smitten by her, right off the bat. And of course, then in verse 6, they talk about, she's a Moab, or a Moabitish woman. And they keep bringing that up. The author here of Ruth does to kind of show that, those were kind of an outcast. Those were foreigners, especially here in Bethlehem. And so, she's in need of a family. And this is this Moabitish girl. Verse 8, in this field, we see that Boaz is going to approach Ruth, and he's going to talk about, he says, in this field, don't go to another field. He even goes as far to call her my daughter. And some of the terminology that he uses there, of kind of, I won't say begging, but definitely encouraging her to stay in that field. He says, and then Boaz unto Ruth, hearest not thou, my daughter, go not and glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here, fast by my maidens. And the terms that he's using here, abide, is kind of the same we get in verse 16 of chapter 1, of where Ruth kind of declares her loyalty to Naomi. And so Boaz, here at this first kind of encounter with her, is saying, listen, you stay right here. Don't go anywhere else. And then he goes on as far as and tells her that, Boaz is going to provide for her. He's also going to protect her. He tells his field hands, you keep an eye on her, make sure she is protected and treated fairly. He tells her, you can even drink from the water jar, which is an amazing thing, because number one, the Israelites was bringing foreigners in to draw the water and to do all these things. But yet here, we have the owner of the field saying, listen, here's water for you. Even though she's a foreigner and even though she's a woman, he's providing her with the water. And in verse 10, she asks, why are you doing this? And he says, well, I've heard what you've done, the loyalty that you had towards your mother-in-law. And then in verse 12, and in Ruth, and then Pastor mentioned this a little bit yesterday, you kind of got to take the reading of it. And it's kind of like God working behind the scenes, because there's not a lot of, and God said, and the Lord did, and all this stuff here. But he makes reference here in verse 12, Boaz does, when he says, the Lord God of Israel, your God. And she declares that in chapter 1. She tells Naomi that your God will be my God. And remember, she's a Moab woman. And then kind of here again, if we're going to go back to the, the dating type thing, in verse 14, we get our first date. Here she is, she's going to glean in his fields. But yet now she is in his house. She's eating from his table. And Boaz says unto her at mealtime, come thou hither and eat of the bread and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. And she sat beside the reapers, and he reached her parched corn, and she did eat, and she sufficed and left. So basically, Ruth is not only now this foreign lady, this outcast, brought into the master's home, eating from his table, and he is serving her. We talked about, leading up to the crucifixion there in the last weeks of devotions and stuff. And we see Jesus doing this exact same thing of when he girds the towel and washes his disciples' feet. The master taking on the role as a servant. And so that's Boaz doing the same thing now here and feeding her from his table. Okay. And so then he gives the commands that, to leave extras, even drop some along the way. So she's not only gleaning, but, it's kind of like the Easter egg hunt that you might have for, a little bitty kid, and you're just laying them right there on the ground, not having to look too hard to find it. And that's what Boaz is doing here for her. In verse 17, it talks about an ephah of barley, and kind of finding out exactly what that was. That would be a half to 2/3 of a bushel, or somewhere between 30 and 50 pounds of grain that she's getting. Side note on that there, 1 to 2 pounds was the going wage for a daily worker in those fields. So to kind of show the love that Boaz has toward Ruth, and the fact that he is providing this outpouring of love to her, she is now packing up, 30 to 50 pounds of wheat on her shoulder and going back to Naomi. And so we see Naomi, and kind of the last time we saw Naomi at the beginning of the chapter of 1, when they come back into Bethlehem. And she tells them that, Mara is now going to be her name, because, she's lost everything. She's empty now. She's bitter of all the things that has happened to her in this last, over the last 10 years. But now she sees these blessings. Okay. So we see her going from bitterness to these blessings. Um, you know, and even in the sorrow, in the depths of our own sorrow, God's working toward our satisfaction. God, again, working behind the scenes, the same thing that we're seeing here in Ruth, and kind of the theology of it, that even though, we see it's written by chance, these things are happening. We know it's not by chance. Things don't happen in our life by chance, but all part of God's design when we submit our life to Him. And so we're going to come to a close here, because, again, I was way too long the last time. I don't want to be that long again, but there's still just a lot of good stuff in here. I've enjoyed so much. Pastors yesterday, studying last night, and then here in chapter 2 of Ruth today. But we finish up here in 20. So she goes back, and they kind of now are making the connection of who Boaz was. That Boaz was a clansman from the tribe of Elimelech. Elimelech, remember we said, died early on while they was in Moab. And so now we're going to see the love and kind of the kindness, the mercy that this kinsman redeemer is going to have, and that being Boaz. And of course, the family structure, you have your family, you have your clan, and then you have your tribe. And at this point in time, in this place, culture wise, the clan was kind of where everything was done, and certain families were part of certain clans. And so Boaz is going to be the clansman, and he has the right to buy back. Buy back what? Okay, buy into the cultural practice of marrying a widow, taking care of the family of someone who was left. And of course, we know that both Naomi and Ruth have lost their husbands. Okay, and so we're going to see him now in chapters 3 and 4 become more of that protector of the family. And so basically what we see here in chapter 2 is, as I said before, God working behind the scenes. And when we have this great analogy of this relationship that Ruth has to Naomi, of love and dedication. Okay. And then we see also now to Boaz to Ruth of this caring for the needy, seeking the outcast, taking them in as his family, as we'll see later on, of sheltering the weak, of serving them at his table, of showering the needy here with grace. He could have, because of where she's at and where she's from, he could have not had her in his fields. But he shows her, stay in this field. And so we see same thing with God. His love and his dedication to us as outcasts, his love and dedication to us as, we're foreigners. But we were grafted in, we were bought into the family of Christ. And that he cares for us. We're needy. We have nothing to offer. Okay. But he gives us everything. So we're needy. The same thing as, then he takes us in and kind of, gives us the commission to go and take care of the needy ourselves. Okay. Seeking the outcast and bringing them into his family. That's what he's done. Sheltering the weak. That's what Christ does. He serves us at his table. Showers us as the needy with his amazing grace, as we celebrated Easter not too long ago, just, a couple days ago. And so I'm going to finish with this right here, because I'm drawing in on 15, 20 minutes here, and I don't want to go 20, but stay in his field. That is the thing that God just struck me with last night, of staying in his field. The times we live in, and we see so many people running from the church, leave the church, running from their faith, chasing the things of the world or whatever else. But what God struck with me on this here, and kind of seeing the theology part of it, and the story of Boaz and Naomi and Ruth, but in essence it's a story of God and his love for us, and him compelling us to stay in his field. He's going to take care of us. And if you're not saved, then run to his field, because there you will find that love. You will find that caring. You will find, the outcast being sought after and brought in. You will see him serving you, at his table, and giving you the things that you need. and showering you with his grace. So I hope you've got something out of Ruth in chapter 2. I've enjoyed it. I'm not going to end with prayer tonight because I'll be back on here in about 30, 40 minutes, and we'll do the 714 prayer. So just pray that everyone's had a great day, a great evening. God bless you, and we'll talk to you later.